Hello everyone and welcome to this audio podcast, and in this audio podcast series in and around the LabZtorm effect v.3. This is an audio podcast in and around the role of endogenous opioids in ischemic preconditioning, or IPC, in humans. This is a Storm Robotics soliloquy and an audio podcast in and around a Storm Robotics production. This is an audio podcast. This audio podcast will be in and around ischemic post-conditioning, or POC. So it was in and around in the mid 1980s, in around the mid 1980s, and in 1985, works by Bromwald and Kloner wrote that myocardial reperfusion may be viewed as a double-edged sword. So, for example, strategies had been in place to sort of minimize acute myocardial ischemic injury for recipients presenting with an acute an acute myocardial or cardiovascular compromise, or patients undergoing or recipients undergoing sort of cardiac surgery intervention, and at the same time, wherein the myocardial injury and cardiomyocyte death that paradoxically occurs with an acute reperfusion of ischemic myocardium remains, where this remains and where this has been documented, remains ischemic myocardium remains a neglected therapeutic in around ischemic myocardium. Therein remains a neglected therapeutic target in both sort of recipient groups. And therefore, although myocardial reperfusion is essential to salvage viable myocardium, it comes at a price. And so it was in the 1960s as well. Jennings and team at first suggested or highlighted that reperfusion might hasten the necrotic process of cardiomyocytes irreversibly injured during ischemia. More contentious was the notion, or had been no notion, that reperfusion could induce the death of cardiomyocytes, i.e., those cells that form cardiac function, which had only been reversibly injured during ischemia. However, the experimental and clinical evidence for myocardial reperfusion injury has been convincingly provided by the observation that therapeutic or pharmaceutic intervention applied solely at the onset of reperfusion can actually reduce myocardial infarct size. So now in and around this sort of an overview in and around ischemic, or what's been referred to as ischemic post-conditioning, or POC. So it was Zhao and colleagues in 2003 had shown again that in a canine model, that after 45 minutes 45-minute episode of sustained myocardial ischemia, the interruption of myocardial reperfusion with 330-second cycles, 330-second cycles of alternating reperfusion or ischemia reduced the myocardial infarct size from 47% reduced the infarct size from 47% to around 11%. The protocol or the procedure of intermittent reperfusion or ischemic post-conditioning or POC also prevented coronary artery endothelial dysfunction and neutrophil accumulation in the area at risk. The application of ischemic post-conditioning or POC stimulus early in reperfusion has been documented and evident as being pivotal. This is evident. This is also evident in the loss of where there's a loss of protection with even 1 minute delay in application of ischemic post conditioning or POC. POC method or methodology is also referred to sort of protocols or procedures aligned to a duration and number of cycles of alternating ischemia and reperfusion applied at the onset of reperfusion. Different schedules of ischemic post-conditioning or POC have been highlighted and documented and demonstrated to be protective and include, for example, 3 to 6 cycles of brief 10 to 30 second alternating ischemia and reperfusion. It was works by Stat and team. Stat in 2005, who highlighted and conducted an RCT, a randomized control trial, to investigate whether ischemic post-conditioning protects the human heart during a coronary angioplasty for acute myocardial infarction. 30 patients or 30 recipients had been put forward for coronary angioplasty for ongoing acute myocardial infarction, who had contributed to being involved in the randomized controlled trial. Patients recipients were randomly assigned to either control or ischemic post-conditioning group or POC group. No adverse events occurred in the POC group, and the study highlighted by Stat in 2005, for example, had highlighted or suggested that POC by coronary angioplasty protects the human heart, can protect the human heart during acute myocardial MI or myocardial infarction, can protect the human heart during acute myocardial infarction or MI or during MI. And at the same time, works have highlighted that myocardial reperfusion injury can manifest in various forms as well. So, for example, reperfusion induced arrhythmias can be induced in patients, induced in recipients or patients, wherein on acutely reperfusing ischemic myocardium through thrombolysis or surgical intervention, and compromise idioventricular rhythm and ventricular arrhythmias as well. The majority of these arrhythmias are self-terminating or are easily managed. And so this now ends, or this then sort of closes on this audio podcast, on this particular audio podcast in around ischaemic post-conditioning, in around ischaemic post-conditioning, or POC. The 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 next audio podcast will be will be in and around will also be in and around, sort of looking at the mechanistics, or the mechanisms in a little bit more depth. So in around the mechanisms of ischaemic preconditioning, and then that will sort of end sort of this audio podcast this audio podcast series as a part of this particular series. There will be a continuation of this series after a sort of a sort of a sort of a rupture feature, sort of a rupture feature audio podcast that will highlight some aspects in and around another sort of subject entity or focus before continuing the next the sort of subsequent audio podcast in this series in and around the LabZtorm effect v3. So this ends this audio podcast in around ischaemic post-conditioning, or POC. This has been audio podcast aligned to the series in and around the LabZtorm effect v3 and the role of endogenous opioids in ischaemic preconditioning, or IPC, in humans, and aligned to a Storm Lobostics soliloquy. And this has been another Storm Lobostics production. Thank you.